back of the rim. Garnett on the slam. Using Curry way downtown. Oh, what a shot from Curry!
The kid had brought Miami its first title in franchise history, and it was only his third season in the league. He'd rivaled Michael Jordan for the title of best NBA Finals performance in history at the age of 24, and at the time, it didn't look like there was an end in sight. So, chances are that you already know the 2003 draft class pretty well. It had some famous and infamous picks, but overall, it gave our generation some of the greatest players we'd ever see for around the next decade or so, while somehow simultaneously giving us one of the biggest busts in history. One of the greats it provided was Flash himself, who just recently decided to call it quits after an illustrious career that we all believe could have went to at least 18. So although you've been hit over the head with this draft a million times since it happened, just like Dirk, Wade deserves a good look at where it all began, including why he wound up drafted 5th overall when he ultimately became the second best player of that cohort. A question with answers that are almost as amazing as the game Raid Shadow Legends. Today I'm introducing you to a mobile game that's absolutely one of the most ambitious RPG projects of 2019, Raid Shadow Legends. The game is completely free to download, and being that you could compare it to a game that you would play on PC or console, it's absolutely one of the most immersive experiences you're gonna find on a smartphone. So in Raid Shadow Legends, you're gonna get everything you'd expect from a brand new RPG title. Amazing 3D graphics, great storylines, PvP battles, giant boss fights, and hundreds of different champions to collect and customize, which are basically your characters within the game. But the craziest part about these champions is the detail in the graphics. Remember, you're getting this out of a mobile game. Raid is growing at an extreme rate, so make sure you get in early. Getting in now means you get a head start. You'll also get in for the upcoming special launch tournament that has a lot of great prizes. And when you download the game, make sure to join my clan by searching for Dom2K. So if you're interested in downloading Raid Shadow Legends, be sure to use the link in the comment section and the description of this video, and through those links, you'll get 50,000 silver immediately and a free epic champion as a part of the new player program, courtesy of the dev team. Hope to see you there. So to answer the question why Dwyane Wade fell to 5th, we can actually do this a bit differently than the other draft retrospects. Here, you'll get the answers as we're reviewing the draft in order because A, you probably already know the players, and B, there are some incredible stories that develop as you move down the list. So to start, you may have heard of the guy that went first that year. Some dude that could have probably been an NFL star, but he just so happened to bless our sport. LeBron James was the consensus, and I mean super consensus, first overall pick in 2003 despite coming straight out of high school. Thing you have to remember is, we're not in the 90s anymore. By this point, you had Kobe, T-Mac, and Garnett all make the jump straight to the league. And by the time of this draft, they were all top players in the game. So chances are, GMs had finally gotten over this thing where they didn't want to deal with, quote, kids. If a player was showing you who he was at a young age the way LeBron did, it was best to just take your chances and believe him by this point. And believe him is just what any team was going to do who happened to get the first overall pick. To hell with Carmelo's national championship run or Dwyane Wade's surge in the tournament. LeBron was one high school kid you did not want to be skeptical of. And lo and behold, somehow the hometown team wound up with the first overall pick. So from day one, Wade was not going first. As a matter of fact, he really had no chance at second shortly after, but we'll get to that. As far as how LeBron's career turned out, oh, I don't know. We're sitting here 16 years later and he's just now showing his first chink in the armor. He's won multiple championships, MVPs, visually and statistically giving us some of the greatest basketball we'll ever experience. And now we await free agency to see if he'll ever be competing for a title again. Thing is, there were many places he could have chosen last summer that would have given him a great chance at a title, so the fact that he's not contending for one now is almost as much of a choice as it was bad luck. I don't know. I think his career turned out okay though, not too shabby. That brings us to the infamous crux of this story. And strap in because you may or may not like what you're about to hear depending on who you're a fan of. To start with, we have to establish a few things. The Pistons were 50 and 32 in 2003, so the only reason they were even here was due to a trade made 5 years earlier. As a result of that deal, they would have the Grizzlies pick as long as it fell outside of first overall. meaning if it didn't, Memphis would have not only gotten to keep their pick, but they would have gone on to select the greatest player of this generation. Some luck that would have been, right? However, they just missed it. The Ping Pongs gave them second, which meant that the Pistons, who were playing in the Eastern Conference Finals at the time of the draft lottery, were now entitled to the second overall pick in one of the most stacked draft classes ever. It'd be like the Raptors or somebody playing in the conference finals next month, and then you learn that they basically get to take some bottom feeder spot in the draft. Now, here's where fate just happened. Kind of. The Pistons needed a big man, and would have their choice out of Bosh, Wade, and Melo because it was clear they were top 5 picks. But them considering Darko Milicic as a lock for the second pick was mostly by chance, because on the day of the lottery, he just so happened to be working out at the same gym some Detroit Pistons management were at. Pure coincidence. Chad Ford, an ESPN draft analyst, told Joe Dumars, who was the Pistons president, that on the other side of the curtain, there was a draft prospect working out. Dumars brought more Pistons management along with him, and by extension, it turned into an impromptu workout, the kind that totally blew Detroit away. From Chris Ford, quote, "It couldn't have been more perfect. Coaches got involved, Darko couldn't miss, and rose to the moment. It was the most impressive workout I'd ever seen. You have this 7'1" kid who was 17 years old doing things he was doing. It was a wow moment, especially for a team that needed a big man." So as you can tell, it was practically done from that moment forward. The Pistons did not believe he'd be on the board by the time they got to the draft and were sure other teams would jump at him once the cat was out of the bag. However, they wound up with the second pick, and nobody could have pried Darko from their grips. They wanted a big man and were convinced that they just found the next Dirk. By this point, Nowitzki was in his second straight year of being an all-star while averaging 25 and 10. Yao Ming had just played his rookie season and was also already an all-star. It was becoming this thing where NBA GMs had a reckoning with the fact that international players were real, legitimate options for the future of a franchise, and Detroit was convinced that in that race, they'd struck gold. Only, they'd also hired Larry Brown not too long after this. Brown would go on to crush Milicic's confidence, play him in extremely limited minutes in games, and none of this was ideal for a rookie who could have used the development. Remember, the Mavericks really committed to Dirk early on, and he was able to blossom with the experience. Not even slightly suggesting Milicic would have followed suit, but I am also pointing out that opportunity, especially early on, does matter. There's a lot of great players in the draft that probably wouldn't benefit from joining a contending team with certain rotations that are trying to win a championship more than they're trying to develop. Milicic himself said about the situation, quote, "They did waste a pick. Why did they take me? Who knows if I really had a chance to play like Wade, Carmelo. Those guys are incredible players. So for me, being a second pick, I don't get why they didn't play me at all. You should take someone that you really think is going to play right away, because just taking somebody to sit on the bench, you waste a pick and that guy's time. I guess they thought they were going to be champions forever." So there's that part of the story, not being drafted into an ideal situation. But he also blames himself, and Larry Brown says he's got no regrets about how he handled him as a player. Remember, he was literally a kid at that draft. He was also coming from overseas into a culture that he didn't understand, which is a struggle you often hear from international players trying to find their way. See Giannis, for example. He says that the frustration led to him going to practice either tipsy or still drunk from the night before, punching walls, and he didn't understand simple things like how teams shower together after a game or practice. The problems on court came from the fact that the little time he did play, Brown wanted him closer to the rim as opposed to where Milicic wanted to shoot and pass near the perimeter. So that suggests that he would have benefited from today's playing style, more than likely. Either way, you can see that it was a combination of his horrible attitude and perspective, combined with his actual basketball situation that led to the bust. But with him being so notorious, you wouldn't even know that he played for 10 years and 6 teams. However, his career averages of just 6 and 4 really put him in a bad spot when you see the names he's surrounded by in the draft. So for the Pistons, it's pretty simple here. There was no chance after seeing Darko that they were going to take Wade, Melo, or anybody really. Maybe if they hadn't have wound up at the same gym as him, just maybe they would have taken Bosh. but the stories of Melo or Wade simply have no merit to them. Also, it gets lost sometimes that people did think highly of Milicic at that time. He wasn't just some mysterious wonder that the Pistons put all their hopes into. An excerpt from Sports Illustrated in December of 2002 reads, quote, "A scout counted at least 10 times that LeBron James failed to get back on defense. One GM said, 'You have to worry his sense of entitlement is so great after being spoiled by the AAU system. There are no such worries about the potential number 2 pick Darko Milicic of Yugoslavia, who sleeps on a pull-out bed and earns around $20,000 for the small club Hemo Farm. Milicic can do it all. Score inside and outside, run the floor, pass, and block shots.'" So that just goes to show that along with Detroit being so blown away by his workout, it was merely confirming some of what was already out there, and that's why nobody else was going second once they secured that pick. Melo himself says that someone told him he was definitely going to Detroit with the second pick, but how are we even so sure that that would have worked out after knowing why Darko failed? Is there any guarantee Larry Brown was going to give minutes to any young player when he flat out said Darko didn't get them because he was playing with veterans? Milicic wasn't getting minutes behind guys like Mehmet Okur under Brown. So who's getting minutes behind Tayshaun Prince and Rip Hamilton in that situation? Carmelo would not have been starting at power forward because positionless basketball wasn't a thing yet. Finally, to wrap up the Darko saga, Joe Dumars admits that he didn't have the proper information to go off of when making this pick. Jerry West, who was working for the Grizzlies at the time, said he'd done his research and never would have taken him. Dumars said, quote, "The background research on Darko was about 20% of what we do now. So yeah, one way or another, the pick was a gigantic mistake and probably avoidable. At best, we can say they should have selected Chris Bosh." That brings us to the Denver Nuggets, who actually called the Pistons about moving up to the second spot in the draft. Apparently, they also had some interest in Milicic, but luckily for them, Detroit was not budging. That being said, Melo was kind of pinned as the second or third pick depending on the circumstance. The Nuggets actually had Darko ahead of him on their board, but with Melo's run at Syracuse, he was not going to fall far. There's not a whole lot out there that suggests Wade was going before Melo at that time. But as far as how his career turned out, it's best summed up in halves. For the first 10 years, he totally lived up to the hype and became one of the best scorers in NBA history. There's even a case to be made that he should have been awarded Rookie of the Year over LeBron. He gave everybody's favorite player buckets, helped improve the Nuggets, and even went toe-to-toe with Kobe Bryant in an epic Western Conference Finals that nearly saw them advance. All the shit started after he decided to re-sign with the Knicks for the 2015 season, rather than joining Derrick Rose in Chicago or some other team for a title run. That era stretches from then to now, where it seems that he hasn't played meaningful basketball in ages, save for the one season he played with OKC, which was pretty underwhelming. That's led to a generation of fans that really never saw his best days, consequently reducing him into an NBA Twitter meme. Today, nobody knows if his career is actually over after being randomly let go by the Rockets early in the season, and it's just this really strange place. On one hand, you've got people that think he can't play anymore. Then you have like the Instagram trainers who swear he could help any team that would sign him. It's been one of the most confusing ends to what looked like an elite career for a decade. We'll have more on this after the summer, I suppose. That leaves only the Toronto Raptors, who could have selected, then subsequently wasted Wade's prime the way they were doing Bosh. This one has an interesting story though. First off, Bosh joked during his jersey retirement that because the Raptors selected him, Miami had to settle for Dwyane Wade. That's hilarious, but every joke's got a bit of truth to it. And in the draft, that might have even seemed true back then. Bosh was on most teams' board above Wade, and Miami even told Bosh how much they liked him during his workout. Problem was, they didn't anticipate he would still be there by the time they got to pick. But the funnier story is, the Heat and Raptors played each other at the end of the 2003 season with identical records, tied for the third worst in the league. Miami won that game and finished with a record one game better than the Raptors. As the story goes, losing that game may have landed the Heat with the fourth pick instead of Toronto, where it seems like they would have selected Bosh. It's even been reported that Pat Riley needed to be convinced that Wade was their guy. Riley said in 2013, quote, "I've always wanted to coach veterans. That year, I was looking at point guards and centers. That's what we needed. I had guys like Kirk Heinrich, TJ Ford, and Chris Kaman high on our list. Wade was one there, but at the start of the process, I wasn't sure." Good lord. Imagine Riley's legacy being picking any of those guys over Wade. And yes, he did not list Bosh there, but again, that's because he knew he would not be there once you got to the 5th pick. And that was before he thought that Darko Milicic was gonna go before some of these guys. So history shook out a different way, and the Raptors and Heat selected accordingly. 7 years later, Miami would combine these two with LeBron James in an unprecedented move that really accelerated the super team era. It'll probably be a really long time before we ever see a draft like 2003, yet alone where the 3 best players somehow end up on the same team. That's what's so unique about it. So really inside the top 5, after LeBron James, the only way you could go wrong was doing what the Pistons did. It seems like a cruel twist of fate, or justice, that a 50-win team, especially when they never get that high in the draft, missed out on a star with so many options. But the fact that they did not take Wade in particular gave him a chance to go build his own legacy. It was perfect for him to end up in a market like South Beach, especially when you consider they had no star or anything else he'd have to contend with to disrupt his path. He went in, he conquered, and his name will forever be synonymous with Miami. The 3rd best shooting guard of all time. Number 3, Dwyane Wade.